You are now listening to Carlie's Couch.
I'm Carlie.
And I'm Lex.
In this podcast, we discuss a wide array of topics about life and how to live your best life.
Whatever that looks like for you.
Hope y'all enjoy. Does being humble mean shrinking yourself? This week on Carlie's Couch, we're unpacking what humility really is and what it isn't.
Welcome to Carlie's Couch. Thanks for joining us this Monday or whatever day it is for you. We're excited to have you here. Thanks for subscribing, loving the podcast, and continuing to engage with us.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all. If you're watching the podcast, you'll see we have another special guest this time.
Hey, what's up?
Shout out to Marvel.
That was her voice. We're working on her speaking.
Yeah, we got to get her into some films and some TV shows. She knows too many people.
Right. She knows more people than us. Today we're talking about being humble and humility, which, you know, off the surface, you can be like, all right. You know, a lot of people talk about it as if it's negative. And then, of course, people who speak about it positively. Carlie, what was your inspiration for us talking about this subject today?
So I remember when Torian came on the podcast. So if you haven't seen T-Nick's episode, I don't remember what episode, but it was really great. And him talking about that and being humble. And we actually looked up the definition of it, and it wasn't what everybody thought. And then I got that re-triggered because I saw a TikTok where a lady was talking about how she was trying to be humble, but she realized that her humility, or what she thought was humility, was really just her shrinking herself and not playing big. Like, it was keeping her small. And I was like, oh, I feel like we're taught to be humble and that this is such a desired trait and such an admirable thing. But how many people really know what it is? Because even whenever we talked about the definition with T, he was like, oh, I didn't know that was the real definition. Like, I'm so glad I don't have that tatted on myself. Or maybe he did have it. No, I think, like, maybe he did have a tat on himself. He's like, oh, man, but when I got that, I didn't realize that was the definition.
So what is the definition of humble and humility?
Having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's own importance. That was the one where I thought that, like, having a low estimate of your own importance.
Because you're not important. I mean, I think that still is being humble is that everything's not about it's not about you being important, and it's not about making yourself the main focus of the things that you do. But part of the definition that we saw in all of the ones that we looked at mentions not being arrogant. And so I also wanted to look up, like, okay, so what's arrogance? Because off the top of my head, I'm just thinking that is kind of when you have a particular tone of, like, condescension, a tone of being better than other people, superiority, self-importance. So I think that's where that could come into play with the other one, where it's like, maybe that's more of like, I'm not self-absorbed and self-important. And often if you're arrogant, then you don't have a regard for what other people think or feel or care about, etc. So you're overinflated. You have an overinflated sense of your status, your worth, your importance, your abilities. And so because of that, you treat people a certain way while holding yourself up high. So that's what arrogance is. So if humility is the opposite of that, it feels like it's less about, it's not saying that you are worth less or are less important or have no ability. It's just that that is not what you lead with, as far as using that as a way to be better than other people, or like how it impacts your thoughts around your relationships and your importance in the world, maybe.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that makes sense. I think that it often, though, gets mixed up with playing small in a sense, because then people like, oh my God, Lex, you did such a good job on this project. No, I didn't. And it's not like a real, like, oh, you know, but like, keep going. It's like, no, I'm not taking the time to recognize my actual own worth. And you could start to underestimate your own worth. Not saying you're more important than anybody else, but you should at least be important to yourself. And you should at least be confident in your own abilities. And I think sometimes, and I think like the content creator who, you know, had the video, I can't remember where it was, but was saying that her confusion for humility was to play small and to underestimate her own abilities and her own worth and her own showing up in spaces.
Yes, and that's not what humility is. So that's why we're having this conversation around catching that and identifying with yourself where you fall kind of on this scale of humility, arrogance, self-importance, but also making sure that there's humility and also false humility, which we'll get into as well. So a couple of the common misconceptions around humility is that humility does not mean self-deprecation. So being humble does not mean that you talk negatively of yourself, down on yourself, less than of yourself.
Yep. And it is not playing small. So it is not taking opportunities because you don't think you're good enough or worthy enough or any of that. We're denying your achievements. That's not being humble.
So then it begs to ask, and this is what I think about usually when people talk about being humble and humility, right? It feels like people want you to bring it down a peg. It feels like they want you to kind of be in a certain space as opposed to it being from a place of, actually trying to give you some type of advice that's helpful. So a lot of times people resist against this idea that I should be humble or humility because can you be humble and still be great? Like, can you be a great and successful person and really push yourself to the limit if you are so humble, if you don't feel that you are the best thing ever, if I don't feel like I'm better than you, if I don't feel like I could da-da-da-da-da, like, do you have to have that to be great and successful?
That's a great question because all that people that I'm thinking of great first Kobe. I don't know if I would say Kobe was humble necessarily. But I know his work ethic and the way he showed up and did all the work. Like he didn't think he was good enough to skip all of those things. Like he did the work and he was confident in what he did, which allowed him to appear arrogant and to feel like he was the best because he did all the work. And so I actually don't know. He's the first person I thought of.
Can both exist? Because, for example, in sports ball, right? Like you do need a level of competitivity. And also something you said about Kobe too that I was thinking about is that I think there actually is a lot of humility and being focused on process and actually being great, because one of his things, like, he didn't just talk junk to be talking junk, and he really was putting crazy work in so that when he spoke on himself, it was the truth. And if what you're speaking is the truth, then that is not, you're not self-deprecating, you're not lowering yourself,
and it's not arrogance.
Yeah, and it could be. There could be ways that you are arrogant, but I think that also could be a great show of humility if you look at it that way. Also, when I think about sports ball players too, a lot of them, even if they're great, you'll see which ones have more training and or more mindset around team. And like if you ask them about something like, oh, you did this, you did that, and it's like, oh, it was a great team effort, da da da, and like always bringing it back around to the fact that it's not just them, that they have good people around them. I think that's a big sign of humility in competitive type spaces as well. What else? Are there other? I think there are other like leaders and folks who practice humility. Pharrell, I think he's like one of the most humilitious people, humble people that I can think of, because literally if you watch his interviews from, I don't know how long back he's been doing it, but every time you watch his interviews, everybody's always trying to compliment him and give him his compliments. And he does accept them. So also being humble does not mean you don't accept your compliments, but he'll be like, thank you. And it's always more, like it's always about something bigger. It's never very absorbed. You can almost like see like the things come into him and like kind of just like bouncing off, but also everything does. So you can tell when there is a strong core in somebody to where whatever you're saying is not really a needed thing. But he's one of those people, like, he never goes in on all the great things that people say to him when he's being interviewed.
Yeah, I was about to say he's one, and it made me think about Beyonce, and it actually makes me think that humility in the true form and greatness go hand in hand, because then you're actually doing the work and showing up for the things, because the one thing Beyonce gonna do is that work, baby.
And how can you not be great?
How can you not be whenever you're showing up? But also, she's never boasting. She's never applying to the nonsense. Even because she don't really talk to people no more. But in her old interviews, even back then, she didn't. Like when they was trying to get her to rag on Destiny's Child after she left and do other stuff, she never did any of that stuff. She always shouted them out. And so I think she's probably a great example of how those things can go hand in hand too, but knowing your worth, like the actual definition of humility.
But also thinking about it the other way, being arrogant, you can still be arrogant and be great in the sense of like great skill, top of the whatever charts or this or that. And those people that may come to mind there are also not the most likable people, alienate people, and so relationships could suffer. So I think that you made a great point of reframing humility and being humble as like that's actually a big part of being great, is that you're focused on like what's real and not just like all about the talk. The last thing about that with being humble and being great is, I know we talk a lot about how our words and our thoughts, they manifest into things. So don't want you to think that just because you're humble, that doesn't mean like you are not minimizing it, that you are like literally like diminishing your skills. Like if you're like, oh, I can't. Now, if you do it the wrong way, if you're like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, or haha, that's nothing. I'm not actually that good. Like, being humble isn't doing that. Like, you're not talking down to yourself and to your skills and your ability, etc. So you still shouldn't be negative speak towards what you want out of life.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, that's where it gets conflated so much. And so that's why I'm glad we're talking about it, and why I really wanted to, because I think that's what what it looks like. People think being humble looks like, oh no, it wasn't me, it was a team, but it really was all you, or whatever happened, and you're never like taking ownership of that thing. So we talked about being humble and being great, and then earlier you mentioned false modesty. Let's hop into what that is.
Because what you just used as an example is something I'll hear a lot, and I think that a lot of times it's not real humility. When people do compliment and they're like, oh, no, that wasn't me. I get out of here. I didn't do it. Blah, blah, blah. And like, that's actually like probably not really. Well, let me not say probably, because it could be. But in a lot of times people are pretending to be humble, and kind of pretending to be like less than they are. How can you tell the difference between genuine humility and performative modesty, do you think? Can you think of any examples?
I'm trying to think, because I feel like actions are always the loudest talkers. Mm-hmm. And so if someone, accepted like that at work, like, oh, or let's say they accepted an award for something and they're like, oh, it really wasn't me, it was all these people. But then like behind the scenes, they're not paying people, not giving them their due, not being authentic and what they're
PTO.
saying. Yeah, they're just looking at like how things look as opposed to how they actually are. And I think great leaders and great people are like servant leaders, and always making sure the people around them are doing good too. And so maybe looking at it from that lens is a great way to see.
I think that's perfect. I think a good show of a person's humility and greatness, being great and humble, is the people around them, and what people around them say about them and how they feel like included and part of things, for sure. And also, I think it is something that does have to become a mindset. Do you feel like you're particularly humble?
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty humble, because I value the people around me. I know my worth now. I used to be humble in the sense that we're talking about, like, shrinking and not feeling like denying compliments and not taking credit for things. So I've grown into like actual humility.
And then for me, I don't necessarily feel that I did too much of like the shrinking as much, but I think that over time I have actually grown to be more confident. So humility is different, because that humility is still more so based in like, no, this is actually the reality that my team did this, or saying in meetings, like saying we instead of saying I. Those things start to happen when you actually view them as reality, not if you're like trying to pretend necessarily. And so I'll often catch myself, like if I say I too many times in a meeting or something, it's like, let me readjust, because I need to keep that in focus, that it's a lot of things going on. But I think that when I speak about myself, I think I have more confidence. And when other people talk to me, I think that they still will be like, oh, you could talk even more shit for real if you wanted to. So I feel like I don't call myself humble, but I don't think I'm like the opposite, really.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. What's the difference between, because you made a differentiation between humility and confidence. What's the difference to you?
No, I'm saying that I think the type of air quote humility between from like the shrinking kind of scale of it being kind of shrinking humility to like being a more confident person. So like you can accept compliments and everything, and it's like not, I don't know, like not everything not going to your head. But I definitely have a lot of ego, and I think ego is a big part of humility and being humble. Not focusing on that. Also, I think you do have to be around a lot of people to really assess like how humble you actually are. And in this time, well, not too much anymore. Like we're remote, or we don't really have to see people all the time. You may not even have a good gauge for real until like something happens, or until you're with people, or you win something, or you do something. But there are ways to make sure you're not. So if you feel like you have been somebody who kind of shrinks yourself a little bit, Carlie, what are some things people can do to still own their achievements while maintaining humility?
You can acknowledge your successes and acknowledge what's going on while also giving credit to when it's due. If someone's like, man, you did such a great job on that project. Great job. Thank you so much. I felt really good about it. The team helped me out so much. Like it was a joint, a joint effort, but thank you so much. Like, I've been working on my public speaking or whatever and kind of owning your part. And I think that also requires you actually doing the work and the action. Like we talked about with Kobe and Beyonce and all that.
We already talked about confidence and humility, but knowing that the two can coexist. So notice when you're doing things that you would consider being humble, I would assess that and be like, all right, am I actually downplaying myself? Or what can I say confidently that is still in the space of humility?
Yeah, I think something else is just being willing to talk about the things that you've done shows confidence. So being able to accept compliments, but also being able to share about your work and not feel like you're boasting just because you're telling things of how they are. And that can probably also help expand your network and get you new opportunities and things, because people don't automatically just know what we do. And if you're so quote unquote humble, you never talk about stuff, nobody can ever meet you where you are because they don't know what it is that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because just because you're humble doesn't mean you don't need to make sales. So since you still got to get on LinkedIn and be like, this project went great.
Wow.
Here's some numbers. Write me a check. Like, you still got to do what you got to do. This is what I used to teach with in regards to social media, is that like on social, if you're like a brand or, a bigger thing, then really your goal is like you want people to talk about you. So that way you're almost like the reflection and amplifying what's said about you. And you're not the person who's like, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great. Like you do the work, and hopefully you have fruits and results that you can amplify. And if you don't have other people who can amplify them, then that means you're kind of working in a vacuum anyway. So I would assess like who are the people you impact and who gain from whatever you do or however you do things, and they should be the ones who can speak of you. But also now when you're spoken of, don't necessarily downplay it. Share that with people and say thank you and acknowledge that.
I think that's the biggest difference. Like when we think about humility and insecurity, I think people are using being humble and having humility as a mask for fears. So maybe you're scared to fail, and so you're scared to even try, and so you're like, oh, I'm so humble, I'm not good enough for this opportunity, and I'm not going to do that. And so it starts to, insecurity shows up as you not taking opportunities, you not acknowledging what's really happening in the space, you not receiving, you not sharing. It kind of keeps you in a box and keeps you small.
But being humble in the way that you can be and that you should be, that we're talking about, allows you to have stronger relationships, because you'll have deeper connections with people because you're seeing them. You're not just like kind of keeping them at the outskirts and acting like they don't exist. You have more trust with people because of that as well. Mm-hmm. And then people will gravitate towards you because you're confident. So you can be confident and be an a-hole, or you can be confident and like people still like you, right? So again, this goes back to what we said at the very beginning about being likable in your confidence and how you speak, and it's just kind of not doing too much.
Yeah, and being true to yourself. There's also more opportunities for growth because, again, if you're not talking about yourself, if you're not meeting people, if you're not putting yourself in those rooms or in those spaces where you can grow, how can you grow? And so real humility can lead to a lot of genuine connections and also more opportunities, because as your network grows and you're building these authentic connections, hopefully your opportunities do too.
When we put this next point, I really thought about how true it is that the bigger your ego, the more stressed out you will always be. A lot of that is just because of like, you're always thinking, you're always worried about how things look. You're always needing things to be right or perfect or this or that. You need people to think about you a certain way. Like, it's a lot of worry and things that are not even all the way in your control when it's about perception, which is mostly tied to like ego. So the less ego you have, the less stress you have. Honestly, I do feel like the less you care about your perception and some of those things, you actually take a lot of weight off of yourself, and your body isn't like fighting to try to reach for this thing that you want to be or that you're trying to portray. And so releasing the need to always be right and releasing the need to be proving something to people will just like actually allow you to relax.
Yeah, because all that's rooted in that fear and insecurity. And how could your nervous system relax whenever that's what's driving you? And then lastly, like thinking about your legacy and your influence, the people who we admire as leaders, the most respected, like historical figures, are always people who uplift others, who make others believe in things that are possible or see themselves or how to uplift communities. And I feel like humility and greatness, again, go hand in hand. And so that gives you an opportunity to help uplift other people.
So this week, we want you to think about humility and what role that plays in your life. Do you struggle with balancing confidence and humility? Yay, nay? Do you need to take it up a notch? Do you need to bring it down a notch? Let us know at Carlie's Couch across all platforms. Share this episode with a friend. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.